Felicitations, malefactors! Welcome back to Random Pick. I'm your host, Sam Bradley, and this week's guest is my good friend Crystal.
Yeah. Hey there. We've known each other for what, like 6 years now, or something.
At least.
At least.
I think probably slightly longer than that.
I should have done that math before we started talking.
Probably. But we'll say somewhere between 6 and 8 years. Give a range to it.
That's good.
But this week we're going to be talking about the benefits of tabletop and role-playing games, specifically their benefits on social anxiety and other things like that. I just thought this was a super interesting topic. So, Crystal, why don't we start off? You want to explain why you decided to talk about this topic specifically?
Yeah. So I love games. D&D is great. That's what I play most of the time. And I kind of started playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was first starting college. And that is when I was doing a lot of my building of social skills, period, because I was a slow person to develop those things. And unwittingly, it became kind of a huge tool in that. And like in the years since then, because that was about a decade ago now, I've continued to play D&D on and off, as well as some other like board games and other role-playing games. And I've continued to kind of see D&D pop up in like headlines and being mentioned on D&D games, how people are finding it to be something that can be very therapeutic. In fact, there are actually like D&D therapy groups that exist, which I just think is something that's really cool. So,
yeah, I think that is super neat. I would definitely agree that partaking in games like that, especially like role-playing games, where you're kind of playing a character, helps you kind of adjust to maybe a new group of people. Or even if it's, people you've known for a while, like if it's your friends or whatever, I think that it's a fun way to interact with people and allowing you to both like be yourself and also like portray a different character. And I think that's just kind of fun, that whole role playing element to the game, whether it be Dungeons and Dragons or like World of Darkness or Rogue Trader or what have you. I think all forms of that kind of tabletop experience is super fun and really rewarding in certain ways, other than just having fun.
yeah, it definitely gives you the opportunity to the thing that I found most useful for me and like my specific type of social anxiety is that it gave me a structure to sit behind, whether that be through like there are dress rules or the fact that like we're rolling dice for some of these things, or it's telling a story, which is something that I've always loved story my whole life. So being able to like dive into and grab onto things that I knew or that felt more controlled helped a lot with being able to like take that first step out and kind of get to know people more and be comfortable in a group of people that I didn't know or that I didn't know well. Yeah. That's kind of how it worked out for me, like without me realizing it until kind of later on. Is that just having that structure and having like a character to get behind and to grab onto their attributes and what's important to them gave me a lot more, give me something else to focus on rather than just, oh, there's a group of new people. I don't know these people very well. What if I say something that like is out of place? Or what if I'm out of place? What if people don't want me here? What if like all those sorts of like what if questions that sort of run through your mind when you have some level of social anxiety, like there wasn't space for them because I was sitting there thinking, well, who is this character that I'm playing, and like what are their interests and what's important to them. um so it kind of gives you this structure to sit behind.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Basically, yeah, taking on the role of another person or your character um, allows you to focus in on those decisions more than worrying about what maybe the other people at the table are thinking about you, or like I know I catch myself a lot of times very much overthinking, like in social situations, like, oh, what if I did this weird or said that weird or whatever. But
Mm.
in a setting like that where you're projecting through your character, like a lot of the times, even if it's something that sounds silly, but it's through the character, it's just like,
Yeah,
well,
there's
that's
just
what the
step
character
away.
would do.
Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely also something we said for um feeling like you belong and like you're in place when you have a role to fulfill. So outside of just like the role playing, there's also the, well, if I wasn't here with my character, they wouldn't have a healer or any of those kinds of things.
Sure.
You kind of have that extra, well, this is why I'm supposed to be here.
Right. Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah, it gives you a purpose to be with the group out other than just we're hanging out and having fun. Like
Mhm.
it adds to the experience. That's another thing that kind of adds to that. Do you remember the first campaign and or character you ever played in a tabletop?
Yeah, a little bit. Like I said, it was like a decade ago, so it's been a while. The
Hmm.
first game that I wound up playing, there was a friend of mine in college that we lived in the same suite. So we shared a living space basically. Like if it was an apartment, we would call each other roommates, but it's college, so you're just suite mates, you're not roommates.
Sure.
Because that distinction is there for some reason. But she was someone that I kind of looked up to a little bit because I, as a freshman, wound up living in the upperclassmen housing because living in apartment sounded like apartment style housing sounded a lot more doable to me as a social situation than living in a like regular dorm
Right, with
building
like 50 other
where it's like,
people.
so having that smaller group was something that was like, that's gonna make life easier for me. But that was the upperclassmen housing. So it's a friend of mine. Her name's Jazz. She's super awesome. Um, she was she was a couple years older than me, and also like she's a person, so she didn't have her life together either because no one does. But she seemed like she had her life more together than I did at that point. And so I kind of a little bit followed her around like a puppy dog, generally, as like this is how I'm learning to be social. And she and her fiance and a few of their friends all played in a game that her fiance ran. So the first couple times I played D&D, I actually just went and watched them play. So like similar to how some people watch Critical Role, I went with my friend and watched
Sure.
her other friends play D&D. And then eventually Jazz kind of decided that she wanted to be time doing some other things that she found like more relaxing at that point in her life, just because she needed something that wasn't as like headspace. So she wanted to like be able to sit and knit or crochet so she could still be with her fiance but not be actively thinking as much in the same way. So she asked if I wanted to take over her character, which was, I remember, a dwarf. I think it was a dwarven fighter, if I remember correctly. And after I went ahead and did that, after playing one game with that dwarven fighter, I was like, Jazz, do you think Dave would be okay if I make my own character? And she's like, I'm sure he'd love that. And because that character just was hard for me to slip into as the first time that I'm playing something. Because, you know, the first time you play role playing games, usually it's just sort of a projection of who you want to be, whether you do that
Sure.
intentionally or not.
Right.
And it was just like too far of a step away from myself, and like I didn't feel like I knew enough about the character to play it, and so I wound up creating a bard, which means my first character was an epic level bard in
Oh wow.
3.5. So I think we were like level 17 or 18 or something at that point, because they'd been kind of playing for a while, but I think they also like wanted to play an epic storyline was part of it. So they'd started at higher
Sure.
level. Um, but yeah, it was an epic level bard. I almost got one shot the first time that I got hit because it was a bard. But thankfully, you know,
Yep.
there's an item that I had that kept me from dying, so that worked out. But yeah, so she was fun. She was extremely paranoid, which you know is not at all an unintentional reflection of how I feel about social situations. Um, the more you learn about yourself while playing D&D.
Oh yeah. I would agree with that.
She was fun. I did not play her for very long because it was an epic campaign already. So things kind of wrapped
Sure.
up not terribly long after I started playing that character. And during college, I did a lot more like going and hanging out with friends and watching them play. So it was like a more low key, I get to know these people and hang out with them, but I didn't have to actually step into that role of being more active yet. So that was the beginnings of D&D for me.
Nice. I think my first campaign I played in was my brother's roommate. He was starting a campaign. I think it was no, it was 3.5. And I played a ranger. I think it was a half elf ranger.
Classic.
And yeah. And I just remember so we were rolling for stats and it was like, roll 4d6, pick the highest 3 or whatever. So I rolled 4 1s.
Ooh,
And the DM's like, normally I would allow people to re-roll that. However, if you take the 3, I'll give you a 20 and a different stat. And I was like, deal. Because I didn't know what I was doing. So I had started the game with 20 decks.
nice.
Or, yeah, maybe it's even high. Maybe it's like 21 or 22, depending on the bonuses half elves get in 3.5. I can't remember. But,
It's been a while since I've played that version.
or I actually think I was an elf. I don't think I was half elf. I think I was just an elf. So they get +2 to deck. I don't remember. I just
Sounds right.
remember I had my deck score was egregious for starting at level like 3 or something like that. And
Yeah,
I had 3 charisma.
nice.
And it worked well because I didn't really know anybody in the group other than my brother's roommate, who I like kind of knew. So my character didn't talk to anybody because he was brutally antisocial. That's why he had 3 charisma.
Nice.
He was also like, I think I also had like, he was like horribly burned all over his body. That's why his charisma was really low.
I think I remember telling
Because
about that
like,
at one point.
yes, but it was fun. Um, that was the first one, but it was a good introduction to how D&D worked. Because I realized that I don't play high charisma characters super well. Well, I guess I do. I don't know. At least starting out, I was terrible because I had to take my time and really think about what I wanted to say in certain situations. And depending on the group, sometimes, the DM's like, oh, well, you just gotta say whatever comes to your mind instead of being like, well, my character would say this better than me.
Mhm.
But that was just a fun thing. I think, yeah, I eventually ended up, trying, you do different builds and stuff that you think might be fun and different like ways you build characters to kind of get a feeling for like I like playing this type of character, and then once you get that idea of like I like this type of character, then you pretty much can roll with that on whenever you start a new campaign.
Yeah, it can be really helpful to kind of let the stats of the game help inform how you play as far as like
Right.
what kind of character, but using them to be able to allow space for you to like fail, which is much harder thing to do in real life. Letting yourself fail in real life is really hard, but letting yourself fail in D&D is much easier. And I think kind of having, it's kind of backed up to one of the things that was mentioned, and because I was a nerd and read a bunch of articles about how D&D is being used in therapy. It having space to fail is one of the things that can be used well when someone actually is doing legitimately like D&D as therapy, because it can let you try new things, and if you fail at it, it's okay because it's just a game. But also, I think, especially in an actual game, especially in a game that is not a therapy session, having that space where you like either are expected to fail or can fail, sort of lets you explore the world a lot more, and kind of, I think, unintentionally D&D and the characters we build and the issues they have a lot of the time help us to learn more about our own strengths and weaknesses.
Definitely. Also, I think it helps maybe like I know sometimes we might build our characters in ways that of something that we might aspire to be. I think's kind of a neat little thing that it might even be like subconsciously too, that as you're building the character, you're like, oh, this would be really cool to have, because you kind of are like, this would be really cool if I could do this like in real life.
Most definitely. I think it also goes for subconsciously or unintentionally giving our characters the flaws that we ourselves have. It happens a lot too. The most blatant example of that I have in the history of the characters that I've made is probably the character that I played the longest. Her name was Luce, and she was a dwarven lycanthrope. She was a weretiger. She was a cleric to the goddess Selune of the moon. All this really cool stuff. But she wound up very heavily having like imposter syndrome.
Okay.
And anytime that I rolled poorly for stuff for her, in her mind, just like dug further and further in, like how much she wasn't a help to the people around her and wasn't like really like great for the team and wasn't like good enough to be on these missions that they were on. Especially when I rolled poorly on something that was like supposed to be a high stat for her, something she was supposed to be good at, like, you know, avoiding possession as a cleric with really high wisdom and proficiency, who then gets possessed and has to beat her friends. That was great for her. But like, especially after I wound up playing that character, which she was a depressing character by the end. She died in combat and then wouldn't come back because she didn't think she could help her friends enough. It was great. But I kind of realized, like, my plan with her was to have this like redemption arc of her like gaining confidence and like realizing that she was pretty pretty awesome, and like had a lot of like things that she could give to the group. And then she died in combat before she started to have the turnaround when she was at the lowest point of that arc. I was like,
yikes.
Oops. That was interesting, especially because like it made me realize more and more how true that is for me. Like just the fact that like, and I think a lot of people have this issue where we see and hold on to our flaws and the places that we mess up a lot more than we like see our own strengths. And so kind of that experience of playing this character that I could objectively look at and be like, yeah, she is really, really cool. She can do some really awesome stuff. Like, look at how high her wisdom is. She's got 20 wisdom. She's got a super high con. Like, she shows up and like brings the justice of light. She's super cool. And then like experiencing role playing that character and having her be like, well, I'm terrible. I'm not defending my friends well. Like, how could I have messed up in this specific situation when she was like also, killing super terrible, awful monsters and doing all these sorts of things. And you just kind of sit and you look at yourself and you're like, maybe I am more good than I think I am.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think that's super cool that you've had that experience. I'm trying to think of times that, well, I know sometimes I've made characters. Probably one of my favorite characters I ever made was a character named, he was a Dragonborn Paladin. His name was Arden, and I rolled his stats for like, again, our DM let us roll, which was a mistake. And I rolled like crazy good on everything except, well, I had like 1 6, but everything else was like at least 13 or higher.
Okay.
Or I think maybe even after racial and like the level up bonuses,
Yeah.
like after we hit level 4, I think everything was at least a +2, other than my intelligence, which was 6.
Nice.
So my character was like really, really dumb, but he was like, really strong and fast and like could tank all of the hits and was like had super good like charisma, so everybody loved him. And I think the kind of the basis of that character was, I think through that I was like, I made a character that everybody really loves, even though he has this one major flaw, but everybody still loves him. And I think that's like, could kind of compare that to, I don't know if like, I mean, I guess I could definitely compare that to like myself, like just that people, love you through your flaws.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that like you can see in both role playing, that you can parallel with your own life of like, even though I have flaws, I know there's people that love me.
Having those experiences can kind of help you to step back and like move around your own negative thought patterns and be able to be like, well, I have personally seen and experienced in a way the fact that this isn't true for this character where I have that barrier. What if it's true for me too?
Mm-hmm.
Something that is really cool with role playing.
All right. Well, this was really, I think this was really good talk. I think I'm gonna end with one more question.
Okay.
I guess it's a 2-part question. So, well, maybe it's 2 questions. But the first question is, obviously you talked about your character Luce. Would you say they're your favorite character you've ever played, or do you have a different character that would be your favorite, or like a specific campaign? I guess they could be one and the same if, the character and the campaign are together.
Kind of. So I did wind up pulling, because Luce didn't come back. We were in a group where you rolled for resurrection anyway, and they rolled high enough on their check to resurrect her. And like as like the battle that she died in was finishing up, and as they were doing that ritual, I kind of was thinking about it, and I was like, she wouldn't come back unless someone says the exact right thing. Didn't wind up happening. So she was a lot of fun. I really, really loved her. I still so that character died, like in real life, that character died probably like 2 years ago. Point. And I only just reorganized my cleric spell cards back to normal because like I couldn't do it because I was so sad that character died. But the next character that I brought into that campaign, which is part of just I loved that campaign. I played with them for close to 3 years, I think. Like meeting every single Sunday and playing for 4 or 6 hours.
Sure.
And it was a game that I enjoyed a lot. But the next character that I brought in, her name was Scarlet, and she was a bard who wound up becoming a bard paladin combo, which unintentionally worked really well because you get higher level spell slots from being a bard that you can then use to smite things.
Fun.
So like you still have your max. It maxes out how high you can get with your smite. In the paladin rules, but she was a really fun character. She was an Azamar who like was also an agnostic. So like I have this angelic background, but basically some stuff had happened in her life and she was like, you didn't warn me and like keep me away from this stuff. I don't believe in you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So she had this really interesting, complicated, like religious background to her that was interesting to try to play and sort of explore that because like religion has been a huge part of my life generally. So kind of exploring someone who's lost faith was an interesting experience and eventually found faith, hence the last few levels being paladin. So she was really fun too. She was all about like freedom for all people. And so like her mission that she went on in our postlude for the game where we kind of described like this is what I think my character would do with the rest of their life was basically like ending slavery worldwide.
Okay.
She was really cool as well, which is part of just I really like enjoyed that. The guy who ran it for us, I think, brought a lot of depth and was very willing and found it important to like bring people's backstory into the campaign. So it was a lot of fun to play in that one.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. I guess I'll answer the question too, just to not kind of, have it be one-sided. Because I know sometimes, especially things where you have to ask somebody's favorite something, it doesn't always come easy.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say my favorite character, probably and campaign mushed together. Like, there's been a lot of great ones that I've been a part of, but it was a campaign that my roommate, Ross DeLong, in college, ran. It was a Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader campaign. And basically, we were space pirates.
Nice.
I don't know if that's was his intention, but that's basically what our party ended up being to a certain degree. My character's name was Orpheus Corsair, and he was the captain of our ship. And there's a specialty race you could play, which is a Pelagier, which is basically a human that has gained. They're basically like a merfolk, so they have like aquatic features. But I asked the DM, I'm like, "Hey, can I have like a squid beard and be Davy Jones?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure." So yes, so my character talked like a pirate the whole time, and it was great because every time we encountered a group of people or we like took hostages or had to fight like some bandits or whatever, I would always ask them, "Do you fear death?" Because that's like the line that Davy Jones has in the Pirates movies, and I always thought that was fun. But I think the coolest thing is I think he's a character that's had probably one of the best arcs. Again, I don't know if it was like intentional or if it just sort of panned out that way. I could believe either way. My roommate was a really good DM. His arc was he was pretty self-centered as like a captain because whenever we would go out on missions, he would basically keep all of the best loot for himself.
Nice.
because we did happen across a bunch of like cursed or like demon possessed like artifacts or weapons, and he's like, I'll keep all of these so that nobody else on the ship gets corrupted. Wink, wink.
Nudge, nudge. Yeah. Hmm.
And then there was a session we did where it was like our holiday session, like right before or right after like Christmas holiday break, whatever.
Okay.
And we fought the Krampus.
Nice.
So the Krampus basically invaded our ship as like a demon, and it pretty much ended up being me 1v1ing it because everybody else was stuck on different parts of the ship dealing with other like demons and stuff that had invaded. But I ended up beating the Krampus and then find out that the Krampus had killed a lot of people on my ship, and that there was like I went into like I was like searching, people's cabins and stuff on the ship, and I found that there was just like this little girl and like her parents had been killed. So like I decided, well, I can't just have this random kid unsupervised, so I'll like watch over her until we can find like a port or something to drop her off. And over the course of time, I've gained like kind of this relationship with this small child who, since she was young enough, started seeing me as like her father. So like over the course of like a few sessions, like till the end of the campaign, I basically kind of had this thing of like this kind of selfish, self-centered character started to care for another person like deeply, as like an actual, like he cared for her as if she was his daughter, sort of a thing. And I'm like, that's a great little thing that he
Nice arc. Yeah.
yeah, it was fun. And then yeah, that was a fun little thing. But so I guess that was kind of the wrap there for that.
If there is anyone who's listening to this and wants to like see more about like psychology and tabletop and all that sort of stuff, there's a couple things that I found pretty cool. There's a YouTube channel called Psychology at the Table, which is run by Dr. Megan Condell. And she sort of dives into like she does not recommend trying to treat D&D as therapy if you're like not a therapist. But she's like, here she kind of goes through like different ways to how to like work with your players when they're working through certain issues. And like kind of talks about how to talk with your players about how their life is going and how that might need to impact the game, whether that be like having a lighter session one week because someone's having a rough time or whatever the case might be. So that was cool. And then there's a couple of groups that are kind of advocating for tabletop and mental health stuff. One is called Take This, which they kind of are trying to work to decrease the stigma and increase support for mental health issues in the game enthusiast community. And then the Badhana group, I think that's how that's pronounced, which is advocating for tabletop gaming as a direct therapeutic and clinical practice. So those were like the cool things that I kind of found when I was like, we're going to talk about this. I have things to say from personal experience, but let's look at what other professional people say.
That's super cool. If you want to shoot me those links, then I can add those to the description when I put this on YouTube, so
Sounds
people
great.
can find those easily. If that's something that they're interested in, I think that's super cool. Well, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show and talking about this very interesting topic.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking me, Sam, and for picking like one of the interesting ones from the things that I was like, here's stuff that I'm kind of passionate about right now. Things. So
Yeah.
getting. And plus, we both really like role-playing games and have played together before and stuff. So it's nice to kind of sit and talk about it with you.
That's very true. But yes, thank you again for coming on the show. If we have the opportunity, we'd love to have you on again. If there's, obviously there are other topics and things that you are passionate about that we might be able to discuss. So if that's something you're interested in, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm sure we can work something like that at some point. Kind of depends on where you're at with spacing people that, because you know a lot of people, Sam.
I do. I do know a lot of people. Um, but, well, once again, thanks for coming on the show, and thanks you to all of those out there listening. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, check out the description for those links. And also, please subscribe, leave a like. If you want to, leave a comment. If you have any suggestions on topics that you would like to hear about, please leave them in the comments, and I will try to find somebody who is knowledgeable on the subject. So once again, thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next time on Random Pick.